This episode is brought to you by Blueprint Health. Blueprint Health is a measurement-based care platform for mental health providers. You can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprinthealth. And also, this episode is brought to you by TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com, the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers in private practice. They're who I use in my practice. Check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. Hello, I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, where we explore the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Hello, folks, and welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 227 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and glad you're with me. Glad you're with me on this journey. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. Glad you made it here, and hope you'll take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. I'm looking forward to you to get to hear from my guest today, Dr. Dana McNeil. Dana was in an earlier episode of the podcast, and so we'll have links here in the show notes and the show summary to that particular episode. It was a dual episode where I interviewed two people, but anyway, Dana has really done a great job in her practice of really putting herself out there as an expert. She is a Gottman trained therapist, and she also does Gottman trainings. And so you'll get to hear more about that and all that she's learned about running a practice and just things along the way. And again, those are the conversations I love to have on this podcast, is just learning from other people's experiences and their stories about how they've gotten to where they've gotten in their private practice journey. So looking forward to you hearing from Dana. But before we get to Dana, I'd love for you to go over to practiceoftherapy.com and just check out the resources we've got there. I'm constantly adding to those. And in particular, the webinars that we've got right now. I've got 3 webinars that we've been kind of promoting or getting people interested in. They are free webinars, and they are automated webinars, so you get to pick the time at which you watch the webinar. And you can find out more about those by going to practiceoftherapy.com/webinars. And that'll give you some subject matter to kind of dip your toe into and learn about. And those topics that we've got right now are Google Workspace for therapists, or using Google Workspace in private practice. There's another free webinar that I teamed up with my good friend Dr. David Hall on going from solo to group practice, on being able to scale without failing. And so Scaling Without Failing is the name of that webinar. And then a third webinar is for those folks that might be interested in maybe becoming part of insurance panels or accepting insurance in their practice. Gotten a lot of great feedback on that one, because I think there's a lot of misnomers and myths about taking insurance in your practice, and it's what I do in my practice, and we've become successful with it, and we're getting better at it all the time. So anyway, be sure and check those out at practiceoftherapy.com/webinars. And also, before we get to my conversation with Dana, love for you to hear from our sponsors, TherapyNotes, and you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes, and also Blueprint Health. They are a platform to measure your effectiveness clinically in your practice. So love for you to hear more about them. You can find out more on our website by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprinthealth. But before we get to Dana, here's a word from our sponsors.
As your practice grows, the systems and processes you have in place will keep your practice running smoothly. That is why it is important to have an electronic health record system that is specific to mental health providers. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. They are who Gordon uses in his practice. And did I mention that they are one of the top-rated EHRs for mental health private practices? Their support is also second to none. Be sure to check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. Be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free. Running a great behavioral health practice is hard. Payers are demanding more measurable outcomes, therapists are harder than ever to hire and retain, and clients expect a digitally enabled care experience. Introducing Blueprint, the all-in-one measurement-based care platform that helps behavioral health providers grow top-line practice revenue, increase clinician satisfaction, and deliver more effective care. Blueprint's intuitive platform administers, scores, and charts hundreds of symptom rating scales to give clinicians deeper insights into how clients are progressing. And you may be eligible to earn additional reimbursement for each administered outcome measure. Get your first month of Blueprint free by going to practiceoftherapy.com/blueprinthealth.
Hello, folks, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so glad to have back on the podcast Dr. Dana McNeil. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Gordon.
Yes, it's good to have you here again. And we were just kind of catching up before we hit record. But Dana, for the folks that might not be as familiar with you, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Oh, geez. I am a owner of a group practice in San Diego, California. It's called The Relationship Place. We have 2 locations. We have about 10 clinicians right now. We specialize in the Gottman method. I'm a certified Gottman therapist. Everybody that comes to work for me wants to work in that niche within a niche of working with couples therapy. I'm also starting a new podcast. I'm going to be featured in a documentary about the art of couples therapy. I've working on some individual branding for myself. I just have a lot of irons in the fire right now.
It's an exciting time for you, Dana. Yeah, I love that. So, yeah. So one of the things that, we were kind of chatting about before we started recording is the fact that you've been able to kind of put yourself out there in a lot of different kind of arenas. I mean, certainly running a group practice is a big endeavor in and of itself, but also just your speaking engagements and your trainings and really kind of establishing yourself as an expert across a lot of places.
That's the goal. Sometimes I feel very much imposter syndrome about the expert part, but I want to change the face of couples therapy. I mean, that's sort of the overarching reach in all of this is I think we need to have more conversations about the need for couples therapy. We're doing a great job like getting our own individual mental health under control and making it a priority and getting our appointments scheduled. But there's still so much stigma about going to couples therapy. And there's this sense from all of the clients that are like, we're broken. This is the last resort. This is what we have to do. If this doesn't work, we're going to get divorced. That's so much pressure on the relationship. And it puts pressure on us as therapists because we think we have to save the couples because they're treating it as if this is the last stop. And so I want to try to normalize the need to go to couples therapy earlier, that it's a good experience, that it's something we should be doing, and that the people that you're working with are approachable and not judgmental.
Right. Yeah. And that's my own experience too with, as a couples therapist myself is just, I think people feel the pressure of, either we're going to make this work, this is our last resort, and, we're just going to be able, in order to be able to kind of check the box and say, oh, we've tried everything kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
what's the checking box? You're already like, so the average couple waits 6 years before they come to therapy. Your box is pretty closed up. It's got some boards across it. It's got locks on it. You're shut down. You're like, prove to me that this works, versus coming in with like, oh my God, I'm so excited to learn some tools before we get ourselves in trouble.
Right. Yeah. And I think, for those of us that work with both couples and individuals, I would say probably, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say probably 98% of the problems that people have are relational. I mean, it involves, their partner or their people they're in relationship with. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. One of the ways I try to convince my couples to stay and commit is, regardless of what happens in your relationship, you're going to have relationships, right? And you're the common denominator in all of them. So even if you're learning how to talk to your boss, your coworkers, your siblings, somebody in the grocery store, this is an investment in yourself. And so kind of helping them come in it from that perspective versus like, we've got to save this relationship, seems to be a little helpful.
Right. Yeah. And I think that helps by being able to get out kind of a different message about, coming to therapy, particularly couples therapy, is it being more about sharpening the saw rather than being about fixing what is broken.
Yeah.
And I love that.
I don't think we necessarily do a good enough job in society normalizing that we're supposed to have conflict, that it's natural, that it's inevitable. They're not the same people. They don't view the world the same way. They don't have the same family of origin. They don't have the same expectations. Of course, you have to have conflict, and we have no tools. So why would you not come to get some?
Right. Yeah. So I know that you have you've been doing a lot of trainings and, working with the Gottman Institute and that sort of thing. Tell folks a little more about all of that work.
Yeah, I mean, for me, being a Gottman certified therapist, that's just like the high holy ground, right? That you get to like rub elbows with the Gottman Institute. So it feels very exciting and very much like an achievement for me. I've been writing quite a few blogs for them. And I just this month did a training on working with explosive couples. And it was a very good turnout. Apparently, I heard it was the biggest turnout that they've had for one of their webinars to date. So that just means that we need more training, right? Couples therapy is such in its infancy still, right? And I read a statistic recently that the couples are so much more damaged than we actually have tools to help them with, right? That there's, domestic violence is up 30% since COVID. Substance misuse is up 300%. Pornography use is up. Our couples are so wounded and so damaged, and they've been even more traumatized by COVID. And yet we have so very little tools to use as couples therapists that there's such a hunger for us to find more things that we can do in the therapy room with our clients. And so I'm excited to be part of that conversation.
Yes. And I know that you've got an event coming up in April, I believe.
I am speaking at UCLA at Emerging Behaviors. It's a conference I'm going to be talking about working with different populations, right? Because we therapists are not just dealing with opposite sex partners. And most of the research that's come to work with couples therapists was based on couples who were in a married relationship and wanted to avoid divorce, right? That's all of the, we didn't have so many different kinds of populations. We weren't working with clients that were identifying as consensual non-monogamy, or were wanting to know how to navigate the different things that were coming up in relationships for couples who are not just opposite sex. There's different stigmas, there's different cultural impacts, there's different needs that your clients are going to have in their relationships. And so we need to start having a conversation about how are we going to work with those clients. We can't just hand over tools like the Gottman method and be like, this will be fine. No, we have to actually look at, if we're using EFT, if we're using Imago, whatever we're using, does it still work for the population that we're asking to apply it? Or are we just using outdated tools that don't have any relevancy to all of our clients?
Yes, I love that. One of the things I know that, again, whenever I do a podcast episode, I go back and refamiliarize myself with people and what they're working on in their work. And I know one of the things that you kind of mentioned in for that workshop that's coming up is, how do we get around kind of our own bias as therapists? I think that's a tough one for a lot of us, of just understanding and getting our head around things like polyamorous relationships and those kinds of things.
I struggle with that a little bit because I guess maybe the way I view it is it's not my relationship. So why do I have to be invested in it? Because I'm not experiencing it as much that we can't get our heads around it. It's going farther back. Like, I don't agree with it. I don't think it works. I don't see value in it. Oh, this is not going to work out. That's not my space to hold as a therapist. It's not my relationship. It's not my bedroom. It's not my life. And so I guess I struggle with that because I don't know why we would hold that perspective that we have to agree with something before we can help our clients.
Right. That is some excellent truth there. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So to change gears a little bit, not that I'm avoiding this subject by any means, but one of the things that that's going through my head, Dana, is that there might be folks out there that are thinking, I want to be like Dr. Dana McNeil when I grow up and do the things that she's doing. So how do people get started in doing the kinds of things that you're doing at the level that you're doing them?
Be crazy, don't sleep, depend on lots of coffee, have a passion to like change the world. This was a second career for me. So I was in the corporate world before doing something completely different. And I just came to this place in life. I was 40 and I'm like, okay, this is the halfway point. Is this what I want the rest of my life to look like? Am I going to be okay when hopefully, knock on wood, I get to 90 and I'm like, what did my life account for? What's the purpose that I showed up for? And it wasn't what I was doing. That was a means to an end. It wasn't what spoke to my soul. So if you find something that's your passion, you just gotta, Wayne Gretzky said, you'll lose every shot that you don't take. So take all the shots. You're never going to regret that you tried to do something, that you care about it, that you're passionate about it, that it drives you, that it moves you forward. And so I'm not scared to get rejected. I'm not scared to have somebody say, you're crazy. What do you know about this? Why would I have you involved in this? Oh, okay. It's a compliment that I admired you and wanted to be involved in your trainings or in your webinar. I don't have a personality that takes offense by people rejecting me, fortunately or unfortunately.
Right. And I think that's something that I think a lot of us struggle with at times, and is that whole imposter syndrome of thinking that we don't have what it takes to kind of put ourselves out there or put ourselves at a level that we observe in others. And I think you're exactly right. You have to, the other thing about it is failure is really a learning opportunity.
I tell all of my new clinicians that I 100% remember all of the lessons that I learned when I screwed up in session. And I don't forget those, and I don't make those again. And those were valuable. That pain that I'm having for a day or two or a week later is so invaluable because you don't do that again. Right.
Yeah. And so I think you're exactly right. Being able to put yourself out there and being able to just kind of be willing to make those mistakes, and whether it's on the clinical side or the business side of things. So what would be some of the big things that you've learned about running a group practice that's maybe some tidbits for folks out there thinking about group practice?
You have to be ready to work with a lot of different personalities who may not get your vision, and that's okay. Right? At the end of the day, I'm the boss. It has to be my vision. It has to be what makes sense to me. Yes, I can take my clinicians into consideration. I can, try to explain it to them in hopes that they buy into it and they believe in it and they see it. But even if they don't, even if nobody gets your vision of what you want to do in your group practice, you have to follow your intuition. You have to follow that whispering that your soul has, because you're at the end of the day, you're the bottom line. And if it doesn't make sense to you, you shouldn't be doing it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think that's so true. And that you have to really, I think as a group practice, you have to really kind of be clear about your own expectations of people and being able to kind of set those early on.
And I think you need to be direct, and you need to set very healthy boundaries with your clinicians. So many of my colleagues that have group practices, they want to make sure that everybody likes them and that everybody's okay with them. And that's not how this works, unfortunately, because it's just human nature that if you give someone the impression that you're okay with something, even if you're not, they're going to push up against your boundary. And if you're not avoiding taking it personally, just like, oh, look, they're doing them. Interesting. Okay, let me direct you back to where we need to go. With love, with kindness, with a compliment sandwich, right? But you have to be willing to correct and be direct, and your clinicians will. They may not like it in the moment, but they will respect you, and that's important.
Right. That was I was doing a consult with someone yesterday, and that was really kind of the whole theme of it, is that he had an employee that was really pushing their boundaries with him of being able to trying to renegotiate different things. So, well, so-and-so does it this way, so-and-so does it that way. And, kind of the bottom line is that, okay, this is the way I do it. This is you can choose to stay or go. Yeah.
Really not taking it personally that people are asking for their needs. Just because I don't agree with them doesn't mean that that's not still their need. And I don't have to get up in my head about like, how dare they ask that for me? Don't they know this? And I don't know what they know or what they don't know. I can just be really clear on what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do.
Right. Right. Again, going full circle back, that's part of the whole relationship dynamic as well.
Which is really an invaluable trait of being a couples therapist. I mean, just as we're direct with our clinicians, we need to be equally direct with our clients about what's not working for them, and asking the other partner not to take it personally. Easier said than done, but we're modeling for them what healthy boundaries are like, and being direct and asking the hard questions and tolerating big emotions.
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, this is I think at the heart of running a group practice, you really have to treat it almost like you would in a marriage relationship or a committed relationship. You're the same way.
And learning what everybody's style is, and, doing your best to try to help them communicate in a style that makes sense for them, but not losing yourself in the process.
Right. Right. So, Dana, to change gears again, I know one of the things that's coming up for you is a new podcast. So tell about that.
Slightly terrified, because look who I have as a model. I want to aspire to be like you when I grow up in my podcast world. It's just in the infancy. We're bringing it together. I think the working title right now is the D Spot. Excellent Relationships with Dr. Dana, something along those lines.
Awesome.
And it's just a celebration and conversation about relationships, all forms of relationships. What makes them work? Why do they seem more attractive to these partners? What are the challenges? What are the things that they've made work? I think we're all curious about what relationships look like inside of the relationship. So I'm hoping to have like really candid conversations about, okay, you're in a throuple and you have a baby. How does that work? Talk to me about that. So those curious questions that we have, but then also with maybe that little clinical spin to like help normalize some of the things that are coming up for them in relationships.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's going to really strike a chord for people, because I think, a theme that I've heard on this podcast and just talking with other clinicians and such is being able to give people space to be vulnerable in the context of hearing from other people that, they're struggling with this same thing. I know in a few episodes back, and I think I've mentioned her twice now on different episodes, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Stacy Lanier, who's a therapist in Nashville. And Stacy and I had an episode where we talked about when therapists are a hot mess. Was the title of that particular episode. But really, I think one of the things too is for therapists to be able to kind of share a little bit of their own struggles, and that, life is messy, life is hard, and we struggle with it too.
Yeah, of course. But we also need to start normalizing things that are outside of our comfort zone, because once we know more, then we can stop being judgmental or put the walls down and just have honest conversations about relationships. We all want them. We all know that they're complicated, and we're so scared of actually being real about what's happening in them because we're afraid that other people are going to be like, oh, something's totally wrong with you guys. You need to get therapy, versus we went to therapy so we can be comfortable with our relationship.
Right. Yeah. I think it's going to be a success.
I hope so.
Yes. Well, Dana, I want to be respectful of your time, and I know that there's so much we could talk about. Tell folks more about how they can get in touch with you and ask more questions and that sort of thing.
Sure. You can contact us a couple of ways. You can always contact me on my own individual website, which is danamcneal.com. My group practice is sdrelationshipplace.com. And then we also have a website called Therapy Getaway, where we do intensives and couples who want to come spend a weekend with us in San Diego and work through some tricky relationships and really roll up their sleeves and get in there.
Well, Dana, I'm so glad we got to reconnect, and I hope that we'll be able to meet in person someday. Well, again, big thanks to Dr. Dana McNeil for joining me on the podcast. Be sure and check her out at danamcneal.com to learn more about the things that she's doing. She's really got some wonderful programs going on. And one of the things that maybe is a takeaway for those of you that are listening, regardless of what stage you're in, you can aspire to great things and you can accomplish those things. Just like Dana has, she's really put herself out there and really established herself as an expert in her community and just in the work that she does. And I think that translates well for a lot of us. And I think getting past that imposter syndrome and being able to just really put yourself out there and being willing to learn from your mistakes. I know that's one thing that I'm always on a big learning curve from is my mistakes. And so, but it's how we learn, is by putting ourselves out there. So be sure and check her out at danamcneal.com. And also be sure and check out our sponsors of the podcast, TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com, and also Blueprint Health. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/Blueprint Health. And big thanks to them for supporting this podcast and making it possible for us to continue to do this work and share this information and all the resources we're trying to put together. And speaking of resources, be sure and go over to practiceoftherapy.com and just look around on the website, and then check out the free webinars at practiceoftherapy.com/webinars so you can begin to learn some more stuff. Going to be getting more and more of those out here this year. And just because that's what I'm hearing back from people, is that they're enjoying being able to have those automated webinars where they can really kind of dive in a little deeper in different subject matter and different things around private practice. So be sure and check those out. And as always, be sure to follow the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or any of the other numerous podcatchers out there. We're found on most all of them. So be sure and check them out and follow us and leave us a review. That'll just help other people find us. So take care, folks. Thanks again for being with me on this journey, and I look forward to being in your ears in future episodes. You You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.